That's business, Ellie." Those 4 words from my father's mouth changed everything as he laughed in my face after my brother stole my inheritance. There I was, standing in my childhood home, staring at my dad and brother as they told me I'd been cut out of my grandmother's will and wouldn't be getting a penny of what she had promised me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. It happened 6 months ago, right after my grandmother's funeral. The October rain had been relentless that day, as if the sky itself was mourning Grandma Rose. We had all gathered at my parents' sprawling Tudor house in Portland, the same house where we'd celebrated countless birthdays, holidays, and family milestones. The house that had always made my modest teacher's apartment feel inadequate in my father's eyes. The scent of funeral lilies still clung to our clothes as relatives slowly departed, offering final condolences and reminiscing about the woman who had been the heart of our family for decades, Grandma Rose, with her warm hugs, secret cookie recipes, and unwavering belief in me when it seemed no one else in the family had any. "Ellie, Marcus, my office, please." My father's voice cut through the murmur of departing guests. James Montgomery never asked for anything, he commanded. The successful real estate developer who had built half of Portland's downtown expected immediate obedience, even at his mother's funeral. My brother Marcus adjusted his Italian silk tie and exchanged a knowing glance with his wife Vanessa. They were the picture-perfect power couple, Marcus with his MBA from Wharton and corner office at a prestigious investment firm, Vanessa with her marketing executive title and perpetually highlighted blonde hair. They had flown in from Chicago on their private charter, making sure everyone knew about the important meetings they'd rescheduled to be here. I caught my husband Tom's eye across the room. His reassuring smile didn't quite reach his eyes. He knew as well as I did what these office meetings usually meant. Another opportunity for my father to praise Marcus while finding subtle ways to diminish me. "I'll be fine," I mouthed to Tom, who was entertaining our 9-year-old daughter Lily with a puzzle in the corner. We had driven the 3 hours from Eugene in our aging Subaru, arriving with homemade sandwiches and a thermos of coffee to save money on the trip. 2 high school English teachers couldn't exactly splurge on fancy restaurants, a fact my father never failed to mention whenever finances came up. Dad's office was exactly as it had always been, intimidatingly neat, smelling of leather and expensive cologne with family photos arranged precisely on shelves. I couldn't help but notice that the most prominent ones featured Marcus's achievements: college graduation, wedding, company launch. The single photo of me was from high school, tucked behind a more recent picture of Marcus shaking hands with the governor. Marcus settled comfortably into one of the plush leather armchairs, while I perched awkwardly on the edge of the matching sofa, feeling like I was being called to the principal's office. "Let's discuss Rose's estate," Dad began without preamble, pulling a leather portfolio from his desk drawer. "As executor, I've reviewed everything thoroughly." I nodded, trying to keep my expression neutral despite the flutter of anticipation in my chest. For years, Grandma Rose had told me that she was leaving me her Victorian house in Astoria, the beautiful blue seaside home where I'd spent my childhood summers, the place where I'd written my first stories on her wraparound porch, watching ships drift into harbor. The house where she'd told me, just last Christmas, "Someday, Eleanor, this will be your writer's retreat. You'll inspire generations of students. Here." It was the one thing in the family that was supposed to be mine. The dream I'd held on to through years of feeling second best. Dad adjusted his reading glasses, scanning a document with practiced efficiency. "Marcus will be receiving the Astoria property, along with the majority of Rose's liquid assets, approximately $850,000 in investments and cash holdings." The words hung in the air for a moment before their meaning penetrated my shock. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" My voice sounded distant, as if coming from someone else. Dad continued without looking up. You'll be receiving her collection of first edition books valued at approximately $15,000, her jewelry collection, and her personal items. Marcus shifted in his chair, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Not a smirk. My brother was too polished for that, but the satisfied look of someone who had gotten exactly what they wanted. There must be some mistake, I said, my hands suddenly cold. Grandma always said the house would be mine. She promised me, repeatedly. You were there last Christmas when she said it. Dad finally looked up, his expression impassive. The final will was updated 3 months ago. Everything is legally binding. 3 months ago? The timeline immediately struck me. When she was in the hospital with pneumonia? When she was on those heavy medications that made her confused about what day it was? Marcus leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Are you suggesting something inappropriate happened, Ellie? His tone was calm but carried a warning edge. I'm saying Grandma Rose told me for 15 years that house would be mine. Then suddenly, while she's seriously ill and Marcus is helping with her paperwork, everything changes? My voice rose despite my efforts to stay composed. Dad closed the portfolio with a snap. The will was witnessed by her lawyer and her doctor. It's completely valid. Did you know about this? I asked my father directly, searching his face for any sign of fairness, the quality he had always preached about in his stern dinner table lectures. Of course he knew, Marcus interjected smoothly. Dad and I discussed the best use of Grandma's assets. That house is worth over $1.2 million now with waterfront property values soaring. It would be irresponsible to use it as some kind of, he waved his hand dismissively, hobby space. The betrayal hit me in waves. First Grandma's will, then, learning my father and brother had planned this together. Dad, I said, my voice trembling slightly. You know this isn't what she wanted. You know that house was meant for me. He removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. Eleanor, be reasonable. Marcus has the financial acumen to manage the property. He's planning to turn it into a high-end vacation rental that will generate significant income for the family trust. The family trust that I'm barely included in, I said, the pieces finally clicking into place. So my inheritance, my grandmother's explicit wish, gets funneled into an account that benefits mostly you and Marcus. Dad's patience visibly thinned. Enough, Ellie. The will is legal. The decisions are made. I stood up, unable to sit still any longer. This is wrong, and you both know it. That's when it happened. The moment that would replay in my mind for months afterward. My father leaned back in his chair, let out a short laugh, and said the words that would permanently alter our relationship. That's business, Ellie. If you'd paid attention to the real world instead of having your head in books all these years, maybe you'd understand how things work. I felt like I'd been slapped. 20 years of trying to earn my father's respect, of excusing his favoritism toward Marcus, of convincing myself that deep down he valued me just as much. All of it crumbled in that moment. Without saying another word, I walked out of the office, past the relatives who pretended not to notice my tears, straight to Tom and Lily. We're leaving, I whispered. As we drove away from the house, Tom kept glancing at me with concern. What happened back there? I stared out at the rain-slicked streets of the neighborhood where I'd grown up. I just learned what my family really thinks of me, I said quietly, and I learned I'm done trying to prove myself to them. What I didn't know then was that 6 months later, they would come crawling back, desperate for the very thing they had always undervalued, my help. And by then, I would be a very different person, one who finally understood the true meaning of business. Preparing. And narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The 3-hour drive home from Portland to Eugene was a blur. Rain hammered against our windshield, matching the storm raging inside me. Tom kept glancing over, his face etched with concern, but he knew me well enough to give me space. In the back seat, Lily had fallen asleep, clutching the small porcelain cat Grandma Rose had given her, one of the few mementos we had managed to take before our abrupt departure. "Do you want to talk about it?" Tom finally asked as we crossed the city limits into Eugene, our modest neighborhood coming into view. I had been silent for nearly 2 hours, replaying the scene in my father's office over and over, the casual way they had announced the theft of my inheritance. The smug look on Marcus's face, the dismissive laugh from my father. "They took it," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "They took Grandma's house. They took everything." Tom reached across the console to squeeze my hand. "What happened, Ellie?" The dam broke then. Words poured out of me in a rushing torrent, explaining how the will had been changed while Grandma was ill, how Marcus was getting the Astoria house along with nearly all her money, how my father had laughed in my face when I protested. "And do you know what I'm getting?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Her books and some jewelry, because apparently that's all I'm worth to them." We pulled into our driveway, the small craftsman bungalow we'd been slowly renovating for the past 5 years. Usually, the sight of our little blue house with its reading nook windows and overflowing garden boxes filled me with contentment. Today, it just reminded me of what I'd lost. "I'm so sorry," Tom said quietly as he turned off the engine. "I know how much that house meant to you." The house in Astoria wasn't just property. It was the only place in my family where I had ever felt truly valued, where Grandma Rose had listened to my stories and poetry without checking her watch, where I had first dreamed of becoming a writer and teacher, where I had planned to host summer writing workshops for disadvantaged teens, kids who, like me, needed someone to tell them their voices mattered. 15 years, I said, my voice breaking. For 15 years, she told me that house would be mine someday. She knew what it meant to me. Tom unbuckled his seatbelt and turned to face me. "Do you think Marcus somehow influenced her to change?" "The will?" I nodded, wiping away tears that had started flowing freely. "She was on heavy painkillers when she was hospitalized. She was confused. Sometimes she thought I was my mother. And Marcus was helping with her paperwork during that time. That's fraud, Ellie. We could contest the will." I had already thought of that. "With what money?" "A good estate lawyer would cost thousands we don't have. Meanwhile, Dad and Marcus have the family lawyer, the family doctor, everyone on their side. They've probably made sure every I is dotted and every T is crossed." The reality of my powerlessness crashed over me in waves. I had never been able to win against them. Not when I chose teaching over law school, not when Tom and I bought our impractical house instead of a newer development, not when we named our daughter after my favorite author instead of a family name. Each decision had been met with subtle disapproval, with comments about responsibility and tradition. And now they had taken the one thing that was supposed to be mine. "Mommy?" Lily's sleepy voice came from the back seat. "Are we home?" I quickly wiped my eyes, putting on the smile I had perfected over years of family gatherings. "Yes, sweetie, we're home." The next morning was Sunday, and I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. My eyes were swollen from crying, my head pounded, and a hollow ache had settled in my chest. Tom had already gotten up with Lily, and I could hear them in the kitchen, the familiar weekend sounds of pancake making and giggles. I reached for my phone, wincing as the screen lit up. 3 missed calls from my mother, a text from my sister-in-law Vanessa offering her condolences on this difficult time, as if someone had died, and an email from Marcus with the subject line, "Moving forward." My thumb hovered over the delete button, but curiosity won out. I opened the email. "Ellie, I understand you're upset about grandmother's estate distribution, but your dramatic exit yesterday was unnecessary and hurtful to the family, especially father. As the executor, he has fulfilled his legal obligations with the utmost integrity. I want to assure you that the Astoria property will remain in the family and be put to good use as a luxury vacation rental. This will benefit all of us through the family trust over time. Your emotional attachment to the house, while understandable, isn't practical from an investment perspective. Once you've had time to process this rationally, we should discuss your portion of the estate. The first edition collection contains some valuable pieces that could be sold if you prefer liquid assets. Best regards. Marcus' eyes stared at the screen, a new wave of anger building. Process this rationally? Emotional attachment? He was talking about Grandma Rose's beloved house, the place where we had baked cookies and watched thunderstorms and read books by the E. Fireplace, like it was just another entry on a balance sheet, and he wanted me to sell the books. Of course he did. Marcus had never understood why anyone would keep books when you could just look things up online. He didn't get that Grandma's collection of first editions, carefully curated over decades, was a testament to her love of literature, to the one passion she and I had shared. The message was clear. Nothing I valued mattered. Nothing I wanted was important. I was expected to accept their decisions, swallow my feelings, and be grateful for whatever scraps they decided to throw my way. Just like always. I deleted the email without responding and dragged myself out of bed. In the kitchen, Lily was helping Tom flip pancakes, her dark curls held back by the headband Grandma Rose had given her last birthday. My beautiful, creative, sensitive child who wrote poems about butterflies and spent hours creating elaborate stories with her stuffed animals. A child who, I suddenly realized with painful clarity, would grow up facing the same dismissal from her grandfather and uncle that I had endured my entire life. They would never see her value, never appreciate her gifts, never make her feel like she belonged. "Mom, we made blueberry pancakes. Your favorite." Lily's face lit up when she saw me, her smile so genuine and open it made my heart ache. I hugged her tightly, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and pancake batter. "Thank you, sweetheart." Tom met my eyes over her head, silently asking if I was okay. I gave him a small nod. I wasn't okay, not by a long shot, but in that moment, I made a decision. My phone buzzed again with another call from my mother. I silenced it without looking and sat down at our small kitchen table, watching my real family, the people who actually loved and valued me. "I'm not going to fight them," I said quietly, as Tom set a stack of pancakes in front of me. He sat down, opposite me, concern etched on his face. "Are you sure? We could at least talk to a lawyer, see what options?" I shook my head. "It's not worth it. The legal battle, the family drama, the expense. I don't want that negativity in our lives anymore." I took a deep breath. But I'm also not going to pretend everything's fine. I'm done with that. "What do you mean?" I had spent my entire life seeking approval from people who would never give it. I had made excuses for their behavior, rationalized their favoritism, and convinced myself that someday, if I just tried hard enough, they would see me, the real me. But yesterday had finally shattered that illusion. I mean, I'm done trying to be part of their world. If they don't respect me, they don't get access to me or to Lily. It's that simple. Tom reached across the table for my hand. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you. You know that, right?" I nodded, feeling the first stirrings of something unexpected, beneath my grief and anger. It felt almost like relief. The relief of finally stopping a fight I could never win. The relief of putting down a burden I had carried for too long. "I know," I said, squeezing his hand back. "That's why we're going to be okay." I didn't know then how my family would react to my withdrawal. I didn't know how much my father and brother had come to rely on me in ways they themselves hadn't even recognized. And I certainly didn't know that the seeds of their downfall had already been planted in the very document they thought had secured their victory. All I knew was that something fundamental had changed inside me. The constant need for their approval, the persistent hope that someday they would see my worth. It was gone, replaced by a steely resolve that would be tested sooner than I could have imagined. Over the next few weeks, a strange calm settled over me. My mother called daily at first, her voicemails oscillating between guilt trips. "I can't believe you're punishing the whole family over a misunderstanding," and forced cheerfulness. "Let's just move past this unpleasantness, shall we?" I listened. To each one without responding, a detached observer to her emotional manipulation. Marcus sent more emails, each one increasingly businesslike and condescending. He outlined how the family assets would be managed, explained the tax benefits of their plan, and even offered to let me use the Astoria house for a weekend each summer, when it wasn't booked by paying guests. The generosity nearly made me laugh out loud. My father remained silent. His absence from the campaign to bring me back into the fold spoke volumes. It was during this period of unwanted communication that I began to see the patterns that had defined our family dynamic for decades, patterns I had been too close to, recognize, too desperate for approval to acknowledge. One rainy afternoon in late October, I was organizing my classroom after school when my colleague Diane stopped by. At 58, she was nearing retirement after 30 years of teaching literature to high schoolers. She had become both mentor and friend to me over the 7 years we'd worked together. "You've been quiet lately," she observed, perching on the edge of a student desk. "Everything okay?" I had been careful to maintain my professional demeanor at work, but Diane had an uncanny ability to see past my facades. Something about her genuine concern cracked the careful compartmentalization I'd been maintaining. "My grandmother died," I started, and then found myself telling her everything. The inheritance, my father's cruelty, my brother's manipulation, and my decision to distance myself from them. Diane listened without interruption, her eyes compassionate behind her red-framed glasses. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment before speaking. "You know, this reminds me of your project proposal last year." I blinked, confused by the apparent non sequitur. "My what?" "The writing program you wanted to start for at-risk students. You spent weeks putting together that presentation for the department, and it was brilliant. But when Principal Harmon rejected it without really considering the merits, you just accepted it. You didn't fight for it, even though you knew it was a good idea." I stiffened slightly. "The budget was tight. There wasn't room for a new program." "That's what you said then?" Diane nodded. "But later I found out there was money allocated for extracurriculars that went unused that year. When I mentioned that to you, do you remember what you said?" I did remember, and the memory made me uncomfortable. I said maybe Harmon was right, that my idea probably wasn't as good as I thought. Even though every other teacher in the department thought it was exceptional, Diane added. It struck me as odd then, how quickly you surrendered something you were passionate about, how readily you assumed you were wrong. A defensive response rose to my lips, but I caught myself. Was she right? Had I done that? "I've watched you do the same thing many times," Diane continued gently. "You light up with an idea in department meetings, but if anyone, especially an authority figure, pushes back, you immediately retreat. You defer to others' judgment, even when your instincts are sound." I stared at the stack of student papers on my desk, feeling oddly exposed. What does this have to do with my family situation? Patterns, Ellie. We carry our family dynamics into every area of our lives. The way you respond to authority figures at work might be connected to your relationship with your father. The way you step back to let others take credit might echo how you've had to make space for your brother all these years. Her words hit me with unexpected force. I had never connected these dots before, never seen how deeply my family's treatment had shaped my behavior in other contexts. That evening, I found myself pulling out photo albums from my childhood, something I hadn't done in years. With new eyes, I examined the visual record of our family history. There was 5-year-old Marcus at his kindergarten graduation, my father beaming beside him with a hand on his shoulder. Next to it, my own kindergarten graduation photo showed my mother standing with me while my father checked his watch, clearly impatient for the ceremony to end. In middle school pictures, Marcus's debate trophies warranted professional photography, while my poetry contest win was commemorated with a hasty snapshot on a disposable camera. High school graduation. My father had splurged on a new BMW for Marcus, captured in a series of proud photos, while my gift had been a used laptop for college, practical for an English major, he'd said. Page after page revealed the same story. Marcus centered, celebrated, invested in. Me as an afterthought, a footnote, someone to be managed rather than championed. But the most revealing photos were from the events my father hadn't deemed important enough to attend at all. My college literary magazine launch, where I'd served as editor-in-chief. The state teaching awards where I'd been recognized for innovative curriculum development. Lily's birth, where my father had sent flowers but arrived 3 days later, staying only long enough to tell me the middle name we'd chosen was unconventional. I closed the album, a strange heaviness and clarity settling over me simultaneously. This wasn't about the house, not really. The house was just the most recent and egregious example of a lifelong pattern. For my entire life, I had been fighting for a place at a table where there was never going to be a seat for me. I had been performing for an audience that had already decided, long before the curtain rose, that my performance wasn't worth watching. And with that realization came another, more painful one. I had internalized their assessment. I had learned to question my own worth, to downplay my achievements, to preemptively assume my ideas wouldn't be valued. I had carried their dismissal into every area of my life, becoming my own harshest critic because that's what they had taught me to be. How many opportunities had I let slip away because I didn't believe I deserved them? How many times had I silenced myself before others could do it for me? Tom found me sitting on our bedroom floor, surrounded by photo albums, tear tracks dried on my cheeks. "Ellie, what's all this?" I looked up at my husband, this kind, supportive, man who had never once made me feel small, who celebrated my successes without reservation, who loved me exactly as I was. "I've been blind," I said quietly. "All these years I thought if I just tried harder, achieved more, became perfect somehow, they would finally see me. But they were never going to see me, Tom. That was never going to happen." He sat down beside me, picking up one of the albums. "That's a lot to process. The worst part is how much I let it affect me. How much I let their view of me become my view of myself." Tom was quiet for a moment, turning pages in the album. Then he stopped at a photo I'd forgotten was there. Me at 22, standing in front of my first classroom, eyes bright with excitement and possibility. "This is who you really are," he said softly. "Not what they tried to make you believe about yourself. This woman who loves teaching, who connects with students others have given up on, who sees potential where others see problems." He turned to me. "That's the real Ellie Montgomery, and she's extraordinary." I leaned against his shoulder, feeling something shift inside me. A small but significant redistribution of weight, as if I'd been carrying a heavy backpack unevenly for years and had finally adjusted the straps. "I need to stop letting them define me," I said, "both in their presence and in their absence." "So what are you going to do?" It was a good question. Cutting contact was one thing, a necessary boundary, but still a reaction to them. I needed to move beyond reacting, I needed to reclaim my own narrative. First, I'm going to resubmit that writing program proposal, I said, the idea crystallizing as I spoke. The one for at-risk students. I'm going to fight for it this time. Tom smiled. That's a start. And I'm going to stop checking my messages from them, I continued. Not just ignoring them, actually blocking them. Their voices have taken up too much space in my head for too long. He nodded, squeezing my hand. What about Grandma Rose's books? Are you going to keep them? The first editions, my meager inheritance compared to the house and money Marcus had received. I hadn't even looked at them yet. They sat in boxes in our spare room. Another reminder of what I'd lost. I'm going to do something with them, I said slowly. Something that would make Grandma proud. Something Marcus and my father would never think to do. I didn't know exactly what that meant yet, but for the first time since the funeral, I felt a spark of purpose. Not a purpose defined by proving my worth to my family, but a purpose that honored what Grandma Rose and I had shared. Our love of literature, of stories, of using words to make sense of a sometimes senseless world. I couldn't have the house in Astoria, but perhaps there was another way to create the writing sanctuary I had dreamed of. A different path that was uniquely mine. What I didn't realize then was that this new path would eventually lead me back to a confrontation with my father and brother, one where I would finally hold all the cards. November arrived with unseasonably cold weather and the distinct feeling that I was entering a new chapter of my life. I had blocked my family's numbers and email addresses, an action that felt both liberating and slightly terrifying. For 34 years, I had organized my existence around their expectations and judgments. Who was I without that framework? It was time to find out. The first test came when I resubmitted my proposal for the writing program. Principal Harmon was skeptical as expected, citing budget constraints and questioning whether troubled students would really benefit from creative writing. In the past, I would have nodded, apologized for wasting his time, and retreated. This time, I stood my ground. I've researched similar programs in districts with even tighter budgets, I said, sliding a folder of data across his desk. The impact on attendance rates and standardized test scores is consistent across demographic groups. These aren't just feel-good anecdotes. These are measurable outcomes. Harmon's eyebrows rose slightly as he skimmed the materials. I hadn't bothered compiling this research before, assuming my idea would be dismissed regardless of its merit. And, I continued, surprising myself with my steady voice, I've already secured a small grant from the Barton Literary Foundation to cover supply costs for the first semester. All we need from the school budget is the classroom space and scheduling accommodation. This was only partially true. I had applied for the grant but hadn't heard back yet. Still, something told me to project confidence rather than hesitation. Harmon studied me with new interest. I've never seen you this assertive, Eleanor. I met his gaze directly. I believe in this program. These students deserve the chance to find their voices, just like the athletes get to find their strength on the field, or the science students get to explore in the lab. After a moment, he nodded. Let me review these materials. We'll talk next week. I walked out of his office feeling strangely powerful. I had advocated for myself without apology, without the usual undercurrent of please like me that had characterized so many of my professional interactions. That evening, I decided to finally confront the boxes of Grandma Rose's books that had been delivered to our house the week after the funeral. They sat in our spare room, 5 heavy cartons sealed with packing tape. I'd been avoiding them, partly because they represented my consolation prize inheritance, and partly because I knew opening them would bring a fresh wave of grief for my grandmother. Tom offered to help, but this felt like something I needed to do alone. I armed myself with a cup of tea, a box cutter, and steeled myself for the emotional impact. The first box contained what I expected: leather-bound classics, their pages delicately foxed with age. Dickens, Austen, Bronte, Twain, the canon of English literature that Grandma had lovingly collected over decades. I ran my fingers over the embossed covers, remembering how she would let me handle them even as a child, teaching me to turn pages carefully and respect the craftsmanship. The second box held more of the same, along with some early 20th century first editions, Fitzgerald, Hemingway, Woolf, books that would indeed be valuable to collectors, as Marcus had so callously pointed out. It was in the third box that I found something unexpected, a small leather journal tucked between two larger volumes. I recognized it immediately as Grandma Rose's diary, the one she had kept for as long as I could remember. Why had it been packed with the first editions? I hesitated before opening it, feeling like an intruder. But something told me she would have wanted me to read it. Perhaps it even intended for me to find it here. The journal was nearly full, entries spanning the last 5 years of her life. I flipped to the most recent pages, dated just 2 months before her death, during her hospital stay. February 15th. Marcus visited again today. Such a thoughtful boy to take time from his busy schedule to help with my affairs. He brought more papers for me to sign. Something about the Astoria property and my investments. I confess the details escape me with these medications making my thoughts so foggy. I asked about the special arrangement for Eleanor, and he assured me everything was being handled according to my wishes. The house will go to her, as I've always planned. It brings me peace knowing she'll have that sanctuary for her writing and teaching. He seemed concerned about the first edition collection, suggesting perhaps it should go to a university library instead of gathering dust. But I've been clear, those books are Eleanor's legacy too. She's the only one who truly appreciates their worth beyond monetary value. The nurse is coming with more pills. How I long for clarity of mind again. My hands trembled as I turned the page to find the next entry, dated 3 days later. February 18th, something doesn't feel right. James came today with Marcus, both so solicitous and concerned. They brought documents already prepared by Walter, the family lawyer, saying I merely needed to sign. When I asked to read them first, James seemed impatient, reminding me that he and Marcus were managing everything so I needn't worry my tired mind with details. I signed because it seemed easier than arguing, but afterward, a strange uneasiness settled over me. I asked again about Eleanor's inheritance, specifically the Astoria house, and Marcus assured me all was arranged as I wished. Yet I can't shake this feeling. Tomorrow I'll ask the nurse to call Eleanor. I need to speak with her directly. The next entry was dated a week later. The handwriting was shakier, the ink blotched in places as if written with unsteady hands. February 25th. Fear a terrible mistake has been made. Nurse Adams helped me review copies of what I signed. It appears everything is going to Marcus. The house, the investments, nearly all of it. Only my books and personal items are designated for Eleanor. This is not what I wanted, I confronted James by phone. He claimed this arrangement made more financial sense and would benefit the family as a whole. When I insisted the house was meant for Eleanor, he dismissed my concerns, saying I was confused and emotional. Perhaps I am confused at times, but on this I am perfectly clear. The Astoria house was always meant for Eleanor. It was our special place, where her spirit could truly shine away from her father's constant criticism and her brother's overshadowing presence. I've asked Nurse Adams to help me contact Walter tomorrow to correct this injustice. Eleanor must not lose her inheritance due to my weakness and their manipulation. My heart pounded as I flipped to the next page, but it was blank. So were all the pages that followed. Whatever Grandma Rose had intended to do, she had either never managed it or never recorded it. I sat back on my heels, emotions swirling, grief, vindication, anger, and an odd sense of peace. I hadn't imagined or exaggerated what happened. Grandma Rose's own words confirmed that my brother and father had deliberately gone against her wishes, taking advantage of her illness to redirect her assets as they saw fit. They had lied. They had manipulated a dying woman. They had stolen what was rightfully mine. And now I had proof. My first instinct was to call a lawyer immediately, to use the journal as evidence to contest the will. But as the initial surge of vindication subsided, I found myself hesitating. Legal battles were expensive and draining. Even with this evidence, the fight would likely be long and bitter, with no guaranteed outcome. Marcus and my father would use every resource at their disposal to discredit the journal, to paint Grandma as confused and me as opportunistic. Did I want to put myself through that? Did I want to spend months or years locked in combat with them, allowing them to continue dominating my thoughts and emotions? I closed the journal and set it aside, walking to the window to gather my thoughts. Outside, dusk was settling over our street. Across the road, our neighbor's daughter was drawing with chalk on their driveway, her father sitting nearby grading papers. The simple scene of connection and quiet support brought tears to my eyes. Life was short. Grandma Rose was gone. The house in Astoria, as much as I had loved it, as much as it should have been mine, was just a building. What mattered more? Getting back what was taken from me, or building something new that no one could take away? I returned to the boxes of books with newfound purpose. These volumes represented more than monetary value or even sentimental connection. They contained worlds of wisdom, beauty, and possibility. In the right hands, they could spark the same love of literature that Grandma Rose had nurtured in me. An idea began to take shape, something that honored Grandma's true wishes while creating something uniquely mine. Something that Marcus and my father, with their focus on property values and investment returns, would never understand or appreciate. I would use these books as the foundation for my own literary sanctuary. Not in Astoria, but right here in Eugene. Not a private retreat, but a community resource. The writing program for at-risk students would be just the beginning, with the journal safely stored in my desk drawer, insurance I hoped never to need, but wouldn't hesitate to use if necessary. I made a decision that would alter the course of not just my life, but the lives of my father and brother, in ways none of us could have anticipated. I would let go of what should have been mine. Not out of weakness or submission, but as a deliberate choice to redirect my energy toward creation rather than conflict. What I didn't know then was that this decision would set in motion a chain of events that would bring my father and brother back into my life under circumstances none of us could have predicted. Circumstances where, for the first time, I would hold all the power. December arrived with unexpected news. The Barton Literary Foundation had not only approved my grant application, but had doubled the requested amount after reviewing my proposal. Principal Harmon, impressed by both, the funding and my newfound confidence gave the writing program his full support. By January, I would be working with 15 at-risk students 3 afternoons a week. It was the first victory in what felt like a long time, and it energized me to move forward with the broader vision taking shape in my mind. I want to start a small literary foundation, I told Tom one evening as we sat at our kitchen table, laptops open, mugs of tea steaming between us. Using Grandma's books as the cornerstone, he looked up from his lesson plans, intrigued. What kind of foundation? Something that combines a community library, writing workshops, and a scholarship fund. A place where kids who love books but don't have access to them can find what they need. I pulled up the document where I'd been sketching out ideas. I'm thinking of calling it Rose's Readers. Tom smiled. Your grandmother would love that. The first editions alone are worth around $20,000 if properly appraised, I continued. If we seed a small endowment with that money, we could fund a scholarship each year for a student pursuing literature or education. But you'd have to sell. "The books to do that," Tom pointed out. "Are you ready to part with them?" It was a fair question. These volumes were my last tangible connection to Grandma Rose, the only inheritance I'd received. Yet keeping them boxed up in our spare room served no purpose beyond sentiment. I think I'll keep a few that were particularly special to her, the Austen First Edition, maybe the signed Steinbeck. But the rest? They should be working in the world, the way she would have wanted. I took a sip of tea. Besides, this feels right. Using what I have to build something meaningful instead of dwelling on what was taken. Tom reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "So what's the first step?" The first step, it turned out, was paperwork. A lot of it. Establishing a nonprofit foundation, even a small one, involved legal filings, tax considerations, and organizational planning. I reached out to Diane, whose husband was an attorney specializing in nonprofit law, and he agreed to help navigate the process at a reduced rate. By mid-December, I had filed the initial incorporation papers for Rose's readers, opened a dedicated bank account, and begun the application for 501c3 tax-exempt status. I'd also contacted a reputable book appraiser to evaluate the first edition collection. Each step I took felt like planting a flag in new territory that belonged solely to me, unconnected to my father's influence or my brother's shadow. This was my project, built from the one thing they had allowed me to keep because they hadn't recognized its true value. The irony wasn't lost on me. Marcus had seen the books as a convenient way to appease me while taking the real prize, the Astoria House. Yet these consolation prize books were becoming the foundation of something potentially more meaningful than a vacation property could ever be. As Christmas approached, I wondered if my family would make another attempt to contact me through the holidays. They didn't. No cards arrived bearing the Montgomery family crest that my father insisted on using for all official correspondence. No gifts appeared for Lily. No invitations to the annual Christmas Eve gathering at my parents' house their silence should have hurt, I supposed. Instead, it felt like confirmation that I had made the right choice. If I could be so easily excised from the family narrative simply for standing up for myself, what kind of family had it really been? Our small Christmas. Just Tom, Lily, and me with a visit from Tom's sister and her family was the most peaceful I could remember. There was no need to buy expensive gifts to impress my father, no pressure to ensure Lily behaved perfectly around her critical grandfather, no tension when Marcus inevitably steered the conversation toward his latest business triumph. Instead, we made cookies, sang carols badly but enthusiastically, watched holiday movies in our pajamas, and exchanged thoughtful but modest presents. Lily declared it the best Christmas ever, and I found myself agreeing. The new year brought practical progress. The book appraiser confirmed what I had suspected. The collection was worth considerably more than Marcus had estimated. Several volumes were particularly valuable, including a first American edition of Moby Dick that the appraiser called museum quality. "You could get at least $35,000 for the collection if you sell to the right buyers," he told me, carefully returning each book to its protective sleeve. "More if you're patient and willing to sell volume by volume to specialized collectors." The figure startled me. It wasn't a fortune by any means, certainly nothing compared to the value of the Astoria House, but it was substantially more than I'd expected, and enough to give Rose's readers a solid financial foundation. My plan had been to sell most of the books, keep a few sentimental favorites, and use the proceeds to fund the foundation's work. But as I considered the appraiser's words, another possibility occurred to me. What if I donated the most valuable volumes to a university library? I asked Tom that evening. We could negotiate a special collection in Grandma's name, with the condition that they digitize everything for public access. Tom considered this. How would that help fund the foundation? Tax deductions, I explained. If I donate books appraised at $35,000 to a qualifying institution, We could deduct that from our taxes over several years. It's not the same as having the cash in hand, but it would still be significant for us financially. And the foundation? I'm thinking we could do a hybrid approach. Sell some books to establish initial funding, donate others for the tax benefit, and keep a small collection to display at whatever physical space we eventually establish. The more I thought about it, the more right it felt. The books would be preserved and accessible to scholars, Grandma Rose would be honored with a named collection, our family would benefit from the tax advantages, and the foundation would still have startup capital from the sales of select volumes. It was a solution that balanced practicality with principle, something my father and brother, for all their business acumen, had never managed to achieve. They saw the world in stark terms: profit or loss, winner or loser, valuable or worthless. I was beginning to see the rich territory that existed between these false dichotomies. By February, 4 months after the confrontation in my father's office, Rose's readers had taken tangible form. I had secured nonprofit status, established a small board of directors, consisting of myself, Tom, Diane, and 2 other educators passionate about literacy, and finalized an agreement with the University of Oregon to create the Rose Montgomery literary collection, with 12 of the most significant first editions. The university's enthusiasm for the donation had surprised me. The head librarian of their special collections department had actually gasped when I mentioned the first American edition of Moby Dick. "We've been trying to acquire one for years," she explained. "Having it as part of a named collection would be a tremendous asset for our research programs." My high school writing program was also flourishing. The 15 students, kids who had been labeled troubled or difficult by the school system, were responding to the opportunity to tell their stories in ways that surprised even me. A girl who had been chronically truant was now showing up early for our sessions. A boy known for fighting was writing powerful poetry about growing up with an incarcerated parent. "You've found your calling, Ellie," Diane told me after sitting in on one of the sessions. "These kids trust you because you see them, really see them." Her words struck a chord. My whole life, I had longed to be seen by my family. Now I was offering that same recognition to students who, like me, had often felt invisible or undervalued. With each passing week, the wound of my disinheritance was healing, not because I had forgotten or forgiven, but because I was building something new and meaningful from the experience. Rose's Readers wasn't just a foundation. It was a declaration of independence, a statement that I could create value on my own terms. What I didn't yet realize was that news of my activities had reached my father and brother. Marcus, with his network of business connections, had learned about the university donation and the establishment of Rose's Readers. My father, through his involvement with various civic organizations in Portland, had heard rumors of my foundation and its mission. They weren't pleased, not because they begrudged my small success, but because I had managed it without their input, their approval, or their control. I was writing my own story now, and they were no longer the central characters. Had I known they were watching, I might have been more prepared for what happened next. But I was focused on building rather than defending, on looking forward rather than over my shoulder. So when the first move in their counteroffensive came, it caught me completely by surprise. March brought unseasonably warm weather to Eugene, the kind of false spring that tempts you to plant gardens weeks too early. I felt a similar blossoming in my own life, a sense of growth and possibility that had been dormant during my years of seeking family approval. Rose's Readers had secured a small physical space, a former insurance office in a historic building downtown. The rent was manageable thanks to a community development grant, and the location was perfect. Walking distance from the high school where I taught and easily accessible by public transportation for students from other parts of the city. Tom. And I spent weekends painting walls, assembling shelving, and transforming the space into a welcoming literary haven. We installed comfortable reading nooks, created a workshop area with a large table and chairs, and set up a small but well-equipped computer station for writing and research. Lily threw herself into the project with characteristic enthusiasm, carefully arranging the books we'd purchased at library sales and thrift stores. "This one goes in fiction because it's made up," she'd explain seriously. "And this one goes in biography because it's about a real person." I watched her small hands carefully shelving books, her brow furrowed in concentration, and felt a surge of gratitude. My daughter was growing up surrounded by people who valued her. Gifts, who encouraged her curiosity, who celebrated her unique perspective. The contrast with my own childhood was stark and sometimes painful, but it reinforced that I had made the right choice in breaking the cycle. The grand opening of Roses. Readers was scheduled for the first Saturday in April. We had planned a community event with readings by local authors, writing workshops for different age groups, and refreshments donated by neighborhood businesses. The local newspaper had even agreed to cover the opening, intrigued by the story of a small literary foundation created by a high school teacher. 2 weeks before the opening, I was staying late at the space, finalizing details for the event. Tom had taken Lily home for dinner, but I wanted to complete the display for the special collection, the few first editions I had kept to showcase Grandma Rose's literary passion. I was carefully arranging these treasures in a locked glass cabinet when the front door chimed. I had forgotten to lock it after Tom and Lily left. "Sorry, we're not open yet," I called without turning around. "Our grand opening is April 3rd. "I know. I read about it in the Portland Business Journal." The voice froze me in place. Deep, assured, familiar, my brother Marcus. I turned slowly. He stood just inside the doorway, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than 3 months of my salary. He looked out of place in the cozy, slightly bohemian space. Too sleek. Too corporate, too calculated. "What are you doing here?" My voice was steadier than I expected, given the shock of seeing him after 6 months of silence. Marcus glanced around the room, taking in the colorful walls, the well-worn furniture, the hand-lettered signs identifying different sections of the small library. His expression was unreadable. "Checking on my sister?" he said smoothly. "It's been a while." "By choice," I reminded him. "Your choice, Dad's choice." He shrugged, taking a few steps into the room. "You cut off communication. We respected your wishes." The audacity of this reframing nearly took my breath away. In their version of reality, they were respecting my boundaries rather than acknowledging that they had driven me away with their actions. "What do you want, Marcus?" I asked directly, placing myself between him and the glass cabinet containing Grandma's books. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out an envelope. "I was in Eugene for a meeting with some tech investors and thought I'd deliver this personally." I made no move to take the envelope. "What is it?" "An invitation." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Dad's 70th birthday is next month. The family is gathering at the Astoria house for the weekend. Celebration dinner, some boating, the usual." The casual reference to the Astoria house, the house that should have been mine, was surely deliberate. I felt a flicker of the old pain, but it was duller now, more distant. "Why would I come to that?" I asked. Marcus sighed, as if I were being unreasonably difficult. "Because he's your father, Ellie. Whatever disagreements we've had, we're still family." "Family," I repeated, the word tasting bitter. "Like when Dad laughed in my face after you stole my inheritance? That kind of family?" A flash of irritation crossed his face. "I didn't steal anything. The will was legal." "Legal doesn't mean right," I said quietly. "You know what Grandma Rose wanted. You both knew, and you took advantage of her when she was ill to change it." Marcus placed the envelope on a nearby table. "Ancient history. Dad wants to move past all that. He wants his family together for his birthday." I studied my brother, looking for any sign of genuine emotion, regret, affection, anything authentic. I saw nothing but the polished facade he had perfected over years of business negotiations. "Why now?" I asked. "It's been 6 months without a word. Why the sudden desire for reconciliation?" Something flickered in his eyes. So quickly I almost missed it. Calculation? Concern? I couldn't tell. "Dad's getting older," he said, his tone softer now. "These milestones make you think about what's important." It was a good answer, reasonable, even touching, but something felt off. Marcus had never been sentimental about family, except when it served his purposes. "And it has nothing to do with Rose's readers? Or the university donation?" I watched his face carefully. His expression remained neutral, but I caught the slight tightening of his jaw. "I heard about your project. It sounds nice, small, but nice." The condescension was typical Marcus, acknowledging my achievement while simultaneously diminishing it. In the past, it would have stung, making me doubt myself and seek his approval. Now it merely clarified what I was dealing with. "Well, you can tell Dad I appreciate the invitation, but I'll be busy that weekend with the foundation." I moved toward the door, a clear signal that the conversation was ending. Marcus didn't budge. "He'll be disappointed." "I'm familiar with that feeling," I replied evenly. My brother's composed facade cracked slightly. "Look, Ellie, I know you're still upset about the house. If that's what this is about, it's not about the house," I interrupted. "It never was. Not really. It's about respect. It's about recognizing that I have value beyond what's useful to you and Dad." He frowned, genuinely confused. "What are you talking about? Of course you have value." "Do I? When's the last time either of you asked about my career? My writing? My daughter? When's the last time you saw me as anything other than someone to manage or manipulate?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the conversation he had planned for. "You're being dramatic. We've always supported you." I actually laughed at that. Supported me? By taking what was meant for me? By treating my career like a hobby? By making my daughter feel less important than your son's? That's not fair. Dad treats all his grandchildren differently, I finished for him. He treats them differently, and we both know it. The difference is that I'm not willing to pretend anymore. A silence fell between us. Through the front windows, I could see the early evening light painting the buildings across the street golden. Inside Rose's readers, the atmosphere had changed. The space that had felt so safe and nurturing just minutes before now seemed charged with decades of family history and unspoken truths. "This place seems important to you," Marcus finally said, gesturing to the room around us. "It is," I acknowledged. "It's something I built myself, without having to fit into someone else's vision of what I should be." He nodded slowly, looking around with more genuine interest now. "The book collection, the first editions, you kept some of them." "I sold some to fund the foundation, donated others to the university, kept a few that were special to Grandma and me." "Smart," he said, and for once there was no condescension in his tone. "Maximizing the value across different channels. Leave it to Marcus to frame even this in business terms." Yet there was something almost like respect in his assessment. "Dad doesn't know I'm here," he admitted suddenly. "The invitation is real, but this visit was my idea." That surprised me. "Why?" Marcus ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, a rare gesture of uncertainty from my always confident brother. "Things have been complicated since you cut contact. Dad won't admit it, but he misses you." "Does he?" I was skeptical. "In his way," Marcus said carefully. "And there are some business matters where your perspective might actually be valuable." And there it was. Not a genuine desire to reconnect with his sister, but a business angle. Some problem where I might be useful again. What kind of business matters? He waved dismissively. Nothing for you to worry about now. Just family business. That might benefit from your different viewpoint. I crossed my arms. I'm not interested in family business, Marcus. I have my own work now. He surveyed the modest space again, and I saw him making calculations behind his eyes. Square footage, overhead costs, potential revenue. Measuring my small foundation against whatever financial metrics he used to evaluate worth. This is a nice little project, he said finally. But it's not exactly changing the world, is it? A few books, some workshops for underprivileged kids. It's charity work, not a career. The old Ellie would have been wounded by this assessment, would have stammered. Defenses and explanations. The new Ellie simply smiled. That's where you're wrong, I said calmly. This foundation will change worlds. Maybe not at the scale you measure success, but in ways that matter deeply to the people involved. Every student who finds their voice here, every story that gets told because of this space, that's a transformation that can't be measured in dollars. Marcus looked genuinely baffled, as if I were speaking a language he couldn't quite translate. In a way, I was. The currency of meaning and impact that drove my work was foreign to his value system. Take the invitation, he said finally, nodding toward the envelope. Think about it, at least. For Dad's sake. I didn't point out that he had shifted from Dad misses you to for Dad's sake. A telling adjustment that confirmed my suspicions about the real motivations behind this visit. I'll think about it, I said, knowing I probably wouldn't. Marcus nodded, apparently satisfied with this small concession. He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the knob. You're different, he observed, studying me with genuine curiosity. Yes, I agreed simply. I am. After he left, I stood in the quiet space of Rose's readers, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Seeing Marcus had been jarring, but not in the way I had feared. Rather than pulling me back into old patterns, the encounter had highlighted just how far I had come. 6 months ago, I had left my father's office feeling shattered and powerless. Today, I had faced my brother as an equal, not because my small foundation could compete with his corporate success by conventional metrics, but because I no longer needed his validation to recognize my own worth. The contrast was stark and illuminating. I had changed, yes. But more importantly, I had found a clarity of purpose that made their tactics, the subtle undermining, the condescension, the transactional view of relationships, transparent and ineffective. I picked up the invitation envelope, but didn't open it. Instead, I placed it in my bag and returned to arranging Grandma's books in the display cabinet. Whatever game my father and brother were playing, whatever business matters they wanted my help with, it could wait. For now, I had worlds to change. One student, one story, one book at a time. I didn't tell Tom about Marcus's visit right away. I wanted to process the encounter myself first, to understand why my brother had really shown up after 6 months of silence. The birthday invitation felt like a pretense, a way to get his foot in the door for some other purpose. 2 days later, I was at school when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Eleanor, this is Vanessa. I know we haven't spoken in a while, but I wanted to personally encourage you to come to James's birthday celebration. Family should be together for these occasions. Let me know if you have any questions about the weekend. V, my sister-in-law, reaching out as if we were old friends who had simply lost touch. Vanessa had always been polite to me, but she was Marcus's perfect counterpart, ambitious, status-conscious, and firmly aligned with my father's worldview. Her sudden friendly outreach struck me as another calculated move in whatever game my family was playing. I didn't respond. The next day, a large floral arrangement arrived at the high school where I taught, an ostentatious display of lilies and orchids that seemed designed to draw attention. The card read, "Looking forward to reconnecting at my birthday. You've been missed. Dad. My colleagues oohed and awed over the extravagant gesture. Your dad must really miss you, Diane commented as I moved the arrangement to a less conspicuous spot in the teacher's lounge. It's complicated, I said, knowing there was no simple way to explain the dynamics at play. The flowers were a classic James Montgomery tactic, a public display that made him look generous while putting me in an awkward position. To reject the gesture would seem ungrateful. To accept it implied forgiveness and reconciliation. It was manipulation disguised as affection, and in the past, it would have worked perfectly. That evening, as Tom and I prepared dinner, I finally told him about Marcus's visit and the subsequent campaign to pull me back into the family orbit. They're up to something, Tom said, voicing exactly what I had been thinking. The question is, what? Whatever it is, it must be important for them to make this kind of effort, I replied, chopping vegetables with perhaps more force than necessary. They've never cared this much about having me around before. Tom considered this as he stirred the pasta sauce. Could it have something to do with the Astoria property? Maybe they're planning to sell it and need your signature for some reason? I shook my head. The will was clear. Marcus got full ownership. They made sure of that. They don't need me for anything related to the house. What about Grandma Rose's other assets? Could there be something they overlooked, something that actually did get left to you? It was possible, but unlikely. My father was nothing if not thorough in financial matters. Maybe, I said slowly. It's not about what they need from me legally, but what they need from me otherwise. Tom raised an eyebrow. Like what? I don't know yet, but Marcus mentioned business matters where my different perspective might be valuable. I set down the knife. Whatever it is, they're going to have to be honest about what they want, instead of trying to manipulate me with flowers and family obligations. The next day brought yet another attempt at contact, this time from my mother. Unlike my father's showy floral display, her approach was more subtle, a thoughtful email that spoke of missing me, of regrets over family tensions, of her desire to see Lily. I know things have been difficult, Eleanor, she wrote. Your father and brother can be challenging at times. But family is family, and these rifts only get harder to heal with time. James's birthday would be the perfect opportunity for a fresh start. Please consider coming, if not for him or yourself, then for Lily. She shouldn't grow up without knowing her grandparents. The invocation of Lily was another strategic move. My mother knew that while I might stand firm for myself, the suggestion that I was depriving my daughter of family relationships could pierce my resolve. But her email also contained a revealing phrase, "Your father and brother can be challenging at times." It was the closest thing to an acknowledgement of wrongdoing I had ever received from any family member. Was it genuine, or just another angle of approach? I forwarded the email to Tom with a simple question. What do you think? His response came quickly. I think you need to decide what you want, not what they want from you. He was right, of course. But what did I want? I had been clear about my boundaries, about not allowing my family back into my life without real acknowledgement of the harm they had done. Yet I couldn't deny a small, persistent part of me that longed for resolution, for a version of family that didn't require me to diminish myself. I didn't respond to my mother's email either. The grand opening of Roses. Readers was approaching, and I threw myself into final preparations. The local newspaper sent a photographer to take pictures for their feature story, and several local authors had confirmed their participation in the opening day events. My students from the high school writing program were preparing to read excerpts from their work, nervous but excited to share their voices. 2 days before the opening, as I was finalizing the program schedule at the foundation space, the door chimed. I looked up, half expecting to see Marcus again, but instead found my father standing in the doorway. James Montgomery had always been an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to commanding rooms. But as he stood there, I noticed something different. He looked older, more tired around the eyes, his usually perfect posture slightly diminished. "Hello, Eleanor," he said, his voice lacking its usual authoritative boom. I set down my papers, steeling myself. "Dad, I'm surprised to see you." He took a few steps into the room, glancing around with the appraising eye of a real estate developer. "So this is your project." "Foundation," I corrected firmly. "Rose's readers." He nodded, continuing his visual assessment. "You've done a lot with a small space. Coming from my father, this was almost a compliment." I remained silent, waiting for him to reveal the real purpose of his visit. "Marcus mentioned he stopped by," he said finally. "Said you were different." "I am," I agreed, echoing my response. "To my brother." Dad moved toward the display cabinet housing Grandma Rose's remaining first editions. "You kept some of the books, the ones that meant the most to us, to Grandma and me." He studied the cabinet for a long moment. "Your grandmother always did love her books. Never understood the attachment myself. A book is just paper and ink after all. But she saw something more in them." The rare moment of reflection caught me off guard. My father rarely spoke of his mother with anything approaching sentimentality. "Why are you here, Dad?" I asked directly. "It's not to discuss Grandma's literary tastes." He turned to face me, his expression uncharacteristically grave. "I received an interesting call last week from Walter Simmons." Walter Simmons was the family attorney who had handled Grandma Rose's will. "And?" I prompted when he didn't continue. "And he informed me that there was a complication with your grandmother's estate." Dad's eyes fixed on mine, searching for a reaction. "Apparently, she had a safety deposit box that wasn't included in the probate process. Walter only recently discovered its existence while reviewing some old correspondence." My pulse quickened. "What kind of complication?" "The box contained a letter, dated 3 days before she died. It was addressed to you. The timing aligned with Grandma's journal entries after she had realized the will had been changed against her wishes, but before she could officially correct it." "Where is this letter now?" I asked, working to keep my voice steady. Dad reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope, yellowed slightly with age. "Walter sent it to me, as executor of the estate. I've read it." Of course he had. Privacy had never been a consideration where my father was concerned. "I'd like to read it myself," I said, holding out my hand. Dad hesitated, then slowly extended the envelope. "You should know that this letter doesn't change the legal status of the will. It has no bearing on the distribution of assets." I took the envelope without responding to his disclaimer. The paper felt delicate between my fingers, and I could see my name written in Grandma Rose's distinctive cursive. I carefully opened it and began to read. "My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, I fear the worst has happened. I've asked Nurse Adams to place this letter in my safety deposit box, as I no longer trust that my wishes are being honored. By James and Marcus. You must know that I never intended for the Astoria house to go to anyone but you. It was our special place, where your beautiful spirit could flourish away from the shadows cast by those who never truly understood your gifts. I believe my will has been changed without my full understanding while I've been unwell. I've asked to speak with Walter about creating a new document, but I worry that time is against me. If I am unable to correct this injustice legally, please know that the house is yours in my heart. And know also that there are other matters of which James and Marcus remain unaware, matters that might serve as some small compensation for what I fear will be taken from you. Beneath the window seat in the blue bedroom of the Astoria house is a hidden compartment. The release is behind the left corner molding. Inside, you will find documents related to investments I made many years ago, independent of your father's knowledge or management. These investments were always intended for you alone. Whatever happens, remember that you were always seen and valued by me, exactly as you are. With all my love, Grandma Rose. I read the letter twice, my hands trembling slightly. The confirmation of what I had already suspected, that Grandma's will had indeed been changed against her wishes, brought a wave of vindication. But it was the revelation of hidden assets that truly stunned me. I looked up to find my father watching me intently. "You knew," I said quietly. "You knew the will didn't reflect her wishes." His expression hardened. Rose was confused near the end. "She didn't understand what was best for the family assets." "She understood perfectly," I countered. "She just didn't agree with your definition of best." A muscle twitched in his jaw. "The letter doesn't change anything legally. The will stands." "And the hidden investments?" I asked, watching him carefully. "The ones she made without your knowledge?" Something flashed in his eyes. Frustration, perhaps even fear. "We haven't found any documentation of other investments. The letter is delusional." "Your grandmother was on heavy medication when she wrote it, but I could see he was lying. They had searched for these mysterious assets and come up empty-handed, and they needed me to find them." "That's why you're really here," I said, the pieces finally falling into place. "That's why the sudden interest in reconciliation, the birthday, invitation, the flowers, Mom's email. You need me to find Grandma's hidden investments." Dad's expression confirmed my theory before he could formulate a denial. For the first time in our relationship, I held information he needed, information that potentially represented significant financial assets. "The Astoria house belongs to the family," he said stiffly. "You're welcome to visit any time, including for my birthday celebration. If, during that visit, you happen to recall anything your grandmother might have mentioned about other investments, that would be helpful to all of us." The naked transactionalism of his offer should have angered me, but instead I felt an odd sense of clarity. This was who my father was, someone who viewed even family relationships through the lens of utility and exchange. The revelation wasn't new, but my freedom from needing his approval was. "I'll think about it," I said, carefully folding Grandma's letter and placing it in my pocket. He nodded, apparently taking my non-committal response as a win. "Your mother will be pleased. She's missed you and Lily." As he turned to leave, I found myself asking the question that had lingered since the funeral. "Why did you do it, Dad? Why did you help Marcus take the house when you knew Grandma wanted me to have it?" He paused at the door, his back to me. For a moment, I thought he might ignore the question entirely. Then, without turning around, he said, "Marcus knows how to maximize value. You would have wasted it on sentiment." With that parting assessment, he left, the bell chiming cheerfully behind him. That night, I sat on our porch swing with Tom, Grandma Rose's letter between us. The decision before me was clear. Attend my father's birthday at the Astoria house and search for the hidden investments, or stand firm in my boundaries. "What are you thinking?" Tom asked, his voice gentle in the evening stillness. I watched the sunset paint our modest neighborhood in gold. "I'm thinking about what Grandma wrote, that I was always seen and valued by her, exactly as I was." "And you were," Tom agreed. "The irony is that they need me now," I said. "After dismissing me for years, they need my help to find something they can't locate themselves." Tom nodded. "So what will you do?" The answer came with surprising clarity. "I'm going to the birthday celebration," I said, "but on my terms." The following weekend, I arrived at the Astoria house alone. No Tom, no Lily. They remained safely in Eugene, protected from whatever manipulation might unfold. I carried only a small overnight bag and Grandma's letter. My father greeted me with careful politeness, my mother with tearful embraces, Marcus with calculating eyes. The house, the beautiful Victorian that should have been mine, was now styled with modern furnishings that erased much of its character. Seeing it transformed stung, but less than I had feared. During dinner, we maintained a veneer of normalcy, discussing safe topics while avoiding the elephant in the room. Only when the meal concluded did my father make his move. "Marcus tells me you've built quite a little project in Eugene," he said, his tone suggesting he was bestowing praise on a child's drawing. "Rose's Readers," I corrected. "Yes, it's going." "Well?" "Charming," he nodded. "Of course, if you ever want to expand beyond charity work, the family business always has opportunities." I met his gaze steadily. "I'm not interested in the family business, Dad. I came for one reason only." The room fell silent. My mother looked anxious, Marcus alert. "I know about Grandma's hidden investments," I continued, "and I know where to find them." Marcus leaned, bored. "You do?" "I do," I confirmed. "But before I reveal that information, I want something in return." My father's expression hardened. "What?" "A significant donation to Rose's Readers. $1 million to be exact." The amount, which I knew they could easily afford, sent my father sputtering. "That's extortion." "No," I corrected calmly. "That's business." In that moment, as my father recognized his own words thrown back at him, something shifted in the room. For the first time in my life, I held the power in our relationship. "You have until morning to decide," I said, rising from the table. "I'll be in the blue bedroom, the one Grandma and I used to share during summer visits." As I climbed the stairs to the bedroom that held so many precious memories, I felt a profound sense of peace. Whatever choice they made, I had already won. The most important battle, the one for my own identity and worth. The investments would be found, one way or another. But I had already discovered something far more valuable: the strength that comes from standing firmly in your own truth, even when those who should love you most try to diminish it.